trail and ultra runners, what is going on? What's happening? Welcome to another episode of the KoopCast. As always, I am your humble host, Coach Jason Koop, and this episode of the podcast brings back a format that you, the listeners, have been clamoring for over the course of the past few months, and that is one of our famous coach roundtables. So on the podcast today, we have coaches Adam Ferdinandson, who's been on the KoopCast before, as well as Addison Smith, who serves a dual role within our coaching department as one of our coaches, as well as working in our athlete services department. And each of us answer the question, what did we learn this year throughout all of our coaching experiences and also the collective coaching experiences of all of our coaching department? This is something that we like to do each and every year. We like to recap what we've learned and what we're going to kind of carry into the future. And I also think that this is pertinent for athletes because you can learn through some of the mistakes we've made and the collective experiences that we have had with our athletes. All right, folks, with that as a backdrop, I am getting right out of the way. Here's our coach roundtable about what we have learned this year with coaches Adam Ferdinandson and Addison Smith. Okay, y'all ready?
Do it, man.
So, Adam, since you've got the bigger list, we're gonna go over what we learned this year. This list could be actually infinite now that I'm thinking about it. I usually have 10 points by the end of the year, even at my ripe old age, but you can go first. You seem like you have a big list to go through. So what'd you learn this year? And then we'll kind of get into what we're going to do differently next, but what'd you learn?
All right. So yeah, I definitely had to stop making a list just for logistics sake at a certain point, but a lot of things came up, a lot of little things. And instead of just kind of blasting them all out, I wanted to see if I could find something that kind of brings them together. And one thing that I kept noticing, a theme that kept popping up, was the theme of my athletes are not me. And at first glance, that's a very elementary coaching 101 type subject. We all know that. We all try not to do it. And I know it most of the time as well, but it sneaks in ways you don't expect, especially with athletes that may be a lot like you and similar to your own fitness. It can blind you to something. So an athlete that typically kind of runs around at the same paces that you do, they're going to a race, and maybe instead of diving into their pacing as much as you should, oh, this would probably be about a 30-hour race for me. And maybe you shortcut some of the due diligence you may have done before. So recognizing that athletes are more than their FTP, or they're more than just what they run around at. And you need to really look at each athlete as a whole, take that into consideration, and really dive into it like you would with anyone else, because they're not you. And I'll add one more to that umbrella. So one more to add to that is night running. Something you guys brought up in a past continuing ed that we did recently was focusing on night running. And to be honest, it was something that I had been doing, but maybe not to the extent that I should be with my athletes. So that's just one change I'm going to be making, is being a bit more deliberate about the extent to which I train that, since it is a big part of 100 milers. And it's something that I've done so much and I feel comfortable with, but my athletes might not. And it's easy to forget that they're not in the same spot that you are.
Well, so it's funny that you mentioned that, because I was reminded that the first way that we came up with any sort of kind of like reasonable framework for ultramarathon training and coaching was with what was called the Ultra Listserv. And I think it's still active. I asked one of our other coaches about this the other day, and he indicated that it was still active, but nobody would even recognize this format of information like dissemination in this day and age. And all it was just an email listserv. So you would email it, how do I prevent blisters during the Leadville Trail 100? And whoever subscribed to this listserv got that email and had the opportunity to reply. So it was basically a giant, carbon copy email chain for all intents and purposes. I'm probably
that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm probably trivializing it a little bit too much. But the point that's relevant to you, Adam, is that the only thing that people really drew from there were, hey, I did this, I heard so and so did that, I saw somebody do this, this is what worked for me. So it was either observations based on what people's personal experiences are, and or observations based off of what they saw other people doing. So to your point, like, you are not your athletes, kind of the root of a lot of early ultramarathon training was basically that, because there wasn't anything else. I mean, there wasn't any sort of like scientific framework really until maybe 2010, 2009 to really kind of like draw from. And one of the things I took away from the coaching conference that you guys were both at, that we're all just kind of recuperating and trying to digest from, is that we're starting to figure it out. Like, we don't have it figured out yet. We probably won't figure it out for another 50 years, but we're starting to figure it out. We're starting to have common pieces of what are the limiting factors in ultra running, what drives performance in ultra running, what are the more important physiological attributes in ultra running, and what are the less physiological important attributes. And through that lens of figuring out kind of those three categories of things, we can kind of drive principles and drive training that is not based off of, hey, here's what I did to make me successful. We can look at it and say, hey, listen, we know this is important. We know this isn't. We know that these other things are important. We know these things aren't. We know that these are common suffering points, right? Or points of performance deterioration, and these other points aren't. So like I said, we're getting that error is not a uncommon one. And it's simply, I think, more than anything else, kind of speaks to the naivety of the sport in general. We're just kind of like early stage, we're a decade or so behind a lot of the other traditional endurance sports. So that's fine. So I think your plight in terms of what you've learned this year, that's not a plight. That's a good thing. The things in terms of what you've learned this year is actually a good one, because it just recognizes that there's a better way. And I'm just kind of thankful that there is a better way, as opposed to just focusing on, well, here's what I did for Leadville, you can have it. Like, here's how you should train for Leadville as well. I'm just glad that we are starting to have these like common points that we can all really draw from.
Yeah, sometimes being so involved in the sport can actually feel like potentially your greatest weakness, is that since you are a participant, you have all these subjective N of one experiences, and it's really tempting to extrapolate those to everyone else.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even you can take it a step further, and it would be maybe not as egregious of an error, but in the same vein of taking all of your athletes' experience and using only that to draw from. I'm not saying that you can't draw from that in certain capacity or with a different lens or a different shade. But certainly if all you did was, hey, I coached these 10 people for Leadville, they, 8 of them finished and 2 of them didn't, so I'm just going to do the same thing for the next 10 people. I would say that's an error, right? Because you're still not applying the point, the kind of basic coaching point of individualization towards that. So I think in our coaching vocabulary, right, as we talk about how we converse with athletes and how we converse as colleagues, like, your antenna should always go up and say, well, I personally would do this, or I had an athlete that did that. And not to say that you can't do that, because you can have learning lessons and apply them for the future, absolutely. But solely relying on them, or too heavily relying on them, would certainly be an error, because once again, the point of individualization should always reign. It should be one of the reigning directions that you should take.
Totally.
Addison, you want to tack onto that at all?
Yeah, I think when you're talking about using, your past experience, I think a lot of that comes from taking the easy way out and not doing the due diligence. Like, when you're speaking to an athlete for the first time, when you're, tackling a certain problem, I feel like there's always so many more layers that you could, be exploring, whether that's, this fueling problem, it sounds similar to this past athlete that I had. let's put A to B. Each athlete has a different lifestyle, a different routine, different stressors. And I think all of those come into play and should be used in concert when you're making, decisions and helping them kind of navigate, whether that's a nutrition issue or whether that's a night running issue or just tackling, a certain workout. I think a lot of ultra runners struggle with that high intensity VO2 max work because it's something that, unless they've been indoctrinated in the sport through track and field and road running, they don't necessarily know what it feels like to work that hard. And so I think even something as small as like, how do you tackle a VO2 max or high intensity workout? It's going to take different cues for different people because they're coming at it from a totally different lens.
Yeah. The people who don't come from a collegiate track and field background tend to just, because they just don't have the experience, they tend to be a little bit more confused about the architecture thing and in terms of how hard should they go, right?
Oh.
How hard should this be? How hard should that be? And when you're a collegiate runner and you have this 4-year experience of going hard during workouts 2 days a week and going hard during a race, usually 1 day a week throughout, 9 months out of the year for 4 years of your life, if you run indoor, outdoor, and cross country, which the majority of collegiate distance runners do, you kind of become numb to the nuance and you just go as hard as you can for every single workout. And the coach, kind of dictates the intensity by the duration and the construction of the workout. And so you're absolutely right that people are not everybody is coming into the sport with that exact same background. And even the way that we communicate what we should be doing and how you should be doing it can take on a little bit of a different tax depending upon that experience.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Addison, that touches on my second point that I was going to get to is educating my athletes and educating them about the workout structure is one of those where you do need to take it so individual and it's really hard for the new people and they don't know what you know. So I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, with my new athletes, I come into it, giving them cues, whether it's, using the talk test, should you be able to talk to someone during a VO2 max intensity interval? No, definitely not. How are you feeling internally? What, could you have gone a little bit longer? Maybe a touch, but, we're trying to get you at your highest output in a way that doesn't feel sustainable. And then, having them go out and try it and then looking back at the data and being able to kind of course correct from there, giving them as many cues as they can the first time, but letting them know that, it's okay if we screw up this workout a little bit and course correct later, because it's going to take time to hit the workout in a way that's going to be, hitting the right intensity moving forward.
You guys don't know this, but I literally just recorded a podcast this morning that would have already come out by the time that this podcast came out. And I did this with Michael Rosenblatt, who has he's performed a lot of meta-analyses on intensity structure. So how can we divide intensities into different components and how do those actually, make a difference towards any physiological parameter or kind of end performance. And once again, you guys didn't know this. I literally recorded this 2 hours before we jumped on the horn here. And one of his points throughout evaluating all of that research across many, many years, across many papers and producing several meta-analyses on these, one of his like broad brushstrokes that he would apply to it is that if you get the intensity close, it's probably doing the exact same end effect. So if we use the example, I'm going to throw our cycling brethren kind of under the bus here, where they tend to overcomplicate the intensity domains that they use. And they've got, even 7 or 9 structures, which is not all that uncommon in a cycling framework, but certainly we've seen more where it's 15, 20 or whatever. That's way too much complication than is actually physiologically practical, because your body doesn't know systems, and his point with it all is as long as you get the intensity close, it's more important to get the interval duration correct. not so much the intensity. So the interval duration has a greater degree of precision, if you want to think about it like that, versus the intensity itself, or the precision, I guess, is more important than on the interval duration than it is actually on the intensity side of things. So Addison, to your point that, let's just get it close and you're going to have the same net effect, is actually really well taken, and also backed up by the vast majority of the scientific literature when they've actually looked at this and tried to decide, is it different if we run or ride our bikes at 97% of our maximum heart rate, or 92% of our VO2 max versus 96% of our maximum heart rate, or 89% of our VO2 max, or some kind of like trivial difference? When you whittle through all of that, the answer is no. Those differences probably don't make as nearly as much, if any, difference at all. And what really matters is the interval duration, and to a second extent, like the total time under a certain amount of load.
No, that definitely checks out. And, what I've been at least experiencing with my athletes, they come into it obviously nervous because they've never experienced, a lot of them, that kind of intensity before. But then, as we've been talking about, either stacking back-to-back workouts, or even the second workout of that week, they're like, oh, wow, I actually, felt even better than I did the first time. It went really well. And I understand, what that intensity feels like. So it takes a little bit of time, but you don't have to get it perfect.
Yeah, 100%.
And Koop, to your point, I've always seen us as having an advantage of not having power meters, because our athletes aren't tempted to split the hairs that many ways. And you have to just choose 3 big buckets. Essentially, those are kind of our ranges for intensity. If you were to do more, it just wouldn't be practical. And I'm just glad that our athletes need to learn to listen to their body and don't have the power meter there to trick them.
But here's the deal. That proposition of like not having sophisticated tools, that's not static. And something will come along, foot-based power meters came along, and everybody kind of, especially in the trail running world, kind of went, meh, this isn't really kind of like practical. Real-time normalized graded pace is a thing. You can get it. It's kind of a convoluted thing. You can get it on your Garmin and probably other watches, and everybody's kind of like, man, this isn't all that practical. But those will gradually get better. You guys have heard me say this in our coaching continuing eds. Real-time lactate monitoring via a wearable sensor is not that far off. That is going to be here very, very, very soon, within the next 3 years at the very most. And that'll be a seismic shift at that point in time, when you can actually do that, because you've taken something that has been used for forever, that we have very good research behind, that a lot of labs around the world use in terms of how to actually control intensity, and you're bringing it to the everyday person. And that's not indifferent from how the cycling power meter actually proliferated within the commercial cycling world, where at one point the cycling power meter was exclusively limited to either a lab setting or professional athletes. And those professional athletes wouldn't even use it in races because it was heavy, it was clumsy, it was just it was awkward. And even the first versions of it, especially the wireless versions, you always had issues with the file transfer and stuff like that. That same like evolutionary pattern where an intensity gauge was reserved for a very small audience and then broadened out to a large audience in cycling, that same pattern is going to maybe not repeat, but it'll at least rhyme when we have an analog in running. And personally, I think that analog is going to be lactate, and of course, all the other sports will have access to it as well. So I think this theme, we don't need to forget this theme of the I don't know why that ding keeps happening. I shut like everything off. Maybe we can edit it in post-production. But I lost my train of thought. So that theme of keeping the intensity ranges simple and practical needs to prevail, even though the technology might actually kind of get a little bit ahead of itself. We need to find kind of the right use cases for whatever kind of comes up, whether it's a real-time lactate meter or whatever permutation of putting in some sort of intensity gauge actually kind of flows through. Adam, you've had enough of the floor here and gone through a small sliver of your list. I'll make fun of you publicly because I know you can take it. Adam, so that the listeners know, part of the inside joke here is renowned within our coaching department for having long lists of questions wherever we go, whether it's a continuing ed or a coaching conference or a camp or just phone call between two colleagues. And so I'm going to cut you off here with all due respect. We're going to get through a small sliver of the list and let Addison kind of like take the floor. So Addison, what did you learn this year after kind of like going through the whole thing? Because you had a lot of cool experience, I would say, as a coach throughout the year, and I'm really curious to hear what you have to say.
Totally. Short answer, a lot. I feel like for both me and Adam, as relatively young coaches, we're just trying to grab at every opportunity we can get, either in the field or picking people's brains. So I think the biggest thing for me is similar kind of in the art of coaching realm and kind of trying to balance, I wouldn't say a dichotomy, but almost similar to a dichotomy of, wanting to support your athlete with whatever endeavors they want to be doing, while also trying to hold the line while being realistic with, the goal and their expectations with what actual training they've been able to put in, and also trying to challenge them, to not only, seek out races that might be a strength of theirs, but, they're a little nervous to do so, or, challenge them on a certain aspect of their training that, is lacking. I feel for myself, I'm working with a lot of middle of the pack athletes or relatively beginner athletes, which is really exciting because, of course, we talk about at that stage, every stimulus is gonna produce some sort of benefit. But now coming into year 2 and almost year 3 with a lot of my athletes, I've been the cheerleader. We've seen some great progress, but at the same time, realizing the athletes have come to CTS coaching not only to grow, physiologically, improve their fitness, but also as ultra runners, they come in wanting a challenge. They want to come in and tackle a race and feel really proud of what they're doing. And in that, sometimes that means being a little bit pushy with certain things that I feel like is necessary as the coach, having known kind of the landscape of, the training process, but also the landscape of on the ground, completing a race. There's certain things that we need to check off the box, whether they realize it or not. And so holding the line on some of those things, whether it's like, you need to be fueling during these 4-hour runs because you're not going to be running for 4 hours in a 50K or 100K. And so those practices need to be in place. And so I'm going to support you. It's your training. We're going to go the direction you want to go on the goal setting side of things. But at the same time, we've got to make sure we get our A, B's, and C's in place. So once you get to race day, you have the tools to complete it successfully and in a way that you can really enjoy it.
It's an interesting dialogue because, we're largely in the commercial space, right? Yeah. Somebody wants to sign up and do a race. We're going to say yes, almost without exception. I'm not saying there's like, it's completely limited, and Addison, you see this on the athlete services side as well, kind of serving a dual role between coach and athlete services. But we always feel that we can make an impact irrespective of how short of a time frame we have to make that impact. But it is a very I'd say not a cautious line, but it takes a very careful eye to be honest with where you can make that impact and how much of an impact that actually is. Sometimes just reorganizing things over the course of the last 4 weeks actually can make a material difference. Sometimes the athlete's confidence in, hey, I've got somebody that's going to make sure that I don't screw it up or help me not screw it up in the last 2 months or whatever that short-term time frame actually makes a difference. But make no mistake, the biggest difference is over longer time frames. And to your point, Addison, of, people come to you and you've got this like push-pull of you want to be realistic with them and then you also want to challenge them. I've always thought the challenge piece comes over long time frames, not necessarily over short ones. because over long time frames, and I just had this with an athlete that wants to do Cocodona, and it's, kind of out of his wheelhouse, at this point. I think he can do it whenever, but I think the more years transpire that I have to coach him, to train him properly, and to build up his fitness and confidence and all those other things, kind of the greater chance of success that he can kind of reap in that arena. So I guess my point with that is that at least in my at least in my observation and my experience, yeah, we can push athletes, but you've got a whole lot more bandwidth when you've got longer periods of time to work with. In both cases, both on the physiological side as well as this like psycho-emotional and challenge, more psychological skill set side of things, it just makes a tremendous difference when you've got long periods of time to work for.
Totally. And I think part of that too is you need those first few months just to establish trust and to establish, what their schedule is, and kind of just getting our feet on the ground in their training. You're not going to be telling them, oh, we need to work on X, Y, and Z, and really giving them hard challenges at that point, because you just met the person. Like, they're going to be there's kind of two motivating factors there. One, you want to keep them because we're still a business and you want to support them, but you also want to retain that athlete. But then secondly, you have to establish a relationship so that the athlete knows that, these challenges, these push pulls, being honest with them comes from a point of that you care about them. You care about their training. You care that, you want them to get to the race and succeed. And, coming in just with flames and, being excited and holding that line and engaging them that way, I just don't think is a sustainable way to go about it at the start. So I think it, like you said, it takes years of building that relationship, establishing the trust, and then we can start to work on, some things on the fringes or holding the line on a few of, intangibles that make a big difference on race day.
Addison, to echo your point there, especially the first part of it, I have written down on my list, be 10% pushier. So, kind of the theme of this is I'm not making any giant changes. I'm not, completely changing how I coached people, but there's definitely some times where I'm a very laid back coach. I don't see my role as I'm not here to force you to do anything. I'm not a drill sergeant. I'm an advisor. I'm here to educate you, and as long as I properly educate you on what the benefits and what the costs are to what you're proposing, whether that's you don't want to do the long run, say someone doesn't want to do any intensity ever. I'm not pretentious about that. If I communicate to them what they're leaving on the table, and they're okay with that, and that's how they want to train, and that's what's sustainable for them 10 years later, then I'll go with that. But there's probably about 10% of the time where I could probably be a bit more holding the line, as you said, of no, we're not going to switch to a bike ride today. We're going to, the race is 2 months away. Let's make sure we do this, and just nudging myself that direction.
Yeah. And to piggyback off of that a little bit, I think, when we talk about, holding the line or trying to challenge people, you have to remember at the end of the day that it's their training. They're paying for the service and they're kind of getting the experience. And it's not us trying to enforce, what we feel like they need to do. At the end of the day, it's their goal, it's their race, and we're here to support that. But I think too, if you can get that balance right or improve on that balance a little bit, like I feel like we're trying to do as younger coaches, I think at the end of the day, they have a lot better value out of that product, because we're not just going to be yes men or yes women and do whatever they want to do.
Yeah, it's really easy to be a yes coach instead of yes ma'am, yes ma'am, or no, a yes man or yes woman. That's what I was trying to say. I wholeheartedly concur, Addison, with this concept of it's their training, and honestly, like incorporating that kind of like overarching philosophy into everything that I do every single day, every single conversation that I have with an athlete makes a material impact, because it takes the ego out of it.
Totally.
Right. Like I've always found that coaches who get really protective about what they're doing, like, oh, I'm doing something proprietary, I don't want to I don't want people to share it. I don't want other people to know it. I put, 2 hours on the calendar tomorrow. And if you do an hour 45, like I'm going to take personal offense to it. And I'm going to kind of like lash out in this way or whatever. All of those behaviors are symptomatic of you think it's your training, and it's not. It's the athlete's training. They're the ones running, putting one foot in front of the other. Yeah, sure, we're guiding it and we should take pride in our work and things like that. But at the end of the day, the athlete's got to choose to wake up, put their running shoes on, and go out the door and execute kind of whatever the training plan is. And I've always found that attitude of keeping yourself in check, keeping your own ego in check, and making sure that it's the athlete's training. It kind of it doesn't it makes sure that you're not clouding your judgment whenever you're talking to an athlete and evaluating their workout, whenever they don't do something, whether they deviate it from it or whatever. Sure, you can provide hard, tough love, course correction type of stuff. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's a big role of a coach. But when you do it from a standpoint of it's the athlete's training, it's not your stuff, it changes your whole, in my opinion, it's changed your whole perspective. Because I used to be one of those coaches that was like, oh man, this athlete's not doing my stuff. Like I used to use that vocabulary. They're not doing my workout. Like, and I don't know at what point this actually, I can't pinpoint the exact time or instance where this actually changed. But whenever I did change to this other frame of reference where it's not my coaching, it's not my training, it's the athlete's training, it just made a whole world of difference. So much that I even try to change the vocabulary, like, the athletes that my athletes, right? I try to change it to the vocabulary of the athletes that I work with, right? Not my athletes, possessive, the athletes that I have the honor and the privilege of guiding and working with. I even take it to that extent. So for all the coaches out there listening to this, think about that for a second. Like, whose training is it at the end of the day? And are you wrapped up in your athletes training with your own stuff? Or are you wrapped up in your athletes training with their stuff, meaning it's their training?
Yeah, that's a great point.
All right. Do you guys have anything to ping pong back on that before I go?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So I have two, just like you guys. Actually, I have two, unlike Adam, who's got 20. One of them is more of a business thing. The other one's a coaching thing. So which one do you guys want to start out with? I'll give you the choice.
Let's go coaching.
We're going to go coaching
Sounds
first. Good. Okay. Pretty simple. Just being there for your athletes is ridiculously important. And I've kind of just learned this over the years of just going out to a lot of races, and then also seeing what happens when that isn't the case. And I had the example this year where I was at a UTMB, and I can't be everywhere all the time. And but I do know that the times that I was there, just standing on the side of the trail, ready to give somebody a high five, not anything magical like, oh, we're going to, patch up your feet or, tell you you're awesome or whatever. Just being there on the side of the trail, those athletes perform better. In the places where I couldn't be, I wish I was there. I wish I had 10 of me to kind of like be out there. Like, that's how powerful this just being there piece is of it. It is of the whole thing. And coaches who are ever out there in a deliberate capacity for athletes during their races that have worked with athletes for a long period of time will all recognize that somehow just being physically present at the race to see the kind of the end accumulation of all of the training and all the stuff that you went through and all the conversations and emails and text messages and file analysis and things like that you went through to get to that, just simply being there to see the end product of that particular phase of training actually ends up being pretty material for the athlete, even when you don't have to do anything, even when you just sit on the side of the trail and like Addison and I did, drive around, France, Italy, and Switzerland at 2 a.m. just to be at random ass locations on the side of the trail. That can actually be like really ridiculously impactful for the athletes. The opposite is also actually true. And this is a kind of a coaching lesson for everybody out there. If you neglect to just say, hey, good luck
Mm-hmm.
to your athletes before a race or afterwards. Hey, good job. Or tell me how it went. Just kind of like simple things. That's probably the biggest coaching error that you can make. And, you know, Dominic, who's probably right over Addison's shoulder, his ears are probably burning right now, because that is one of the top 3, if not the top 1 complaints that he hears. My coach didn't call me right before the race, and my coach didn't say anything after I did the race. So it's not like we're infallible here. We obviously make that mistake. Otherwise, Dominic wouldn't hear that feedback at all. But the opposite is actually also true 180 degrees the other way. Like, you completely deteriorate any level of confidence and trust and, you know, relationship building and things like that when, for whatever reason, you neglect those touch points. So I'm not saying that every coach has to be at every race for every single athlete. That's somewhat impractical unless you're a national team coach or you work with one of the NGBs or something like that. But at least some physical and or virtual touch point is just ridiculously important, and you can't underestimate the power of just saying, hey, go get them, or just being there out there at the side of the trail. That actually means a lot to each and every athlete.
And you can see it, like being a third party witness to all the athletes that you worked with at UTMB. You know, it's going from suffering and all of the different faces you can make in the pain cave to just lighting up and feeling like you have a real team member on the ground. And so, yeah, being able to be a part of that, not only for, you know, my athletes, but for everyone that I was helping out crew at UTMB in various races throughout the year, you can not only, you know, hear it from the feedback afterwards, it was great to see you, but you can see it, and it's a positive shift. And no matter what sort of suffering that they're in, when they see that person that they've worked with for weeks and weeks and weeks to get to that pinnacle moment.
Yeah. So good story about that I'll tell publicly, and I'll anonymize as much as possible. We had several athletes, both a lot of which I coach, but also some of our other coaches worked with that weren't over at UTMB. And one of them happened to have all of their stuff lost in transport right before the race. They came over kind of late, maybe it was like Wednesday or Thursday or something like that. Showed up, and immediately, no baggage or anything like that. Our whole coaching team kind of rallied to put together a, you know, some sort of like Frankenstein care package for this athlete based on our gear, because we had our gear there, right? So we put them all together, put it in our chalet, opened up our chalet. Athlete came over and then kind of like backfilled the rest of the stuff with all of the things in Chamonix. For anybody that ever goes to one of the UTMB races that ever has this happen to them, and this will happen because there's just so many people and the airlines suck at keeping track of people's bags, don't panic, because Chamonix is an outdoor person's paradise, and you can find pretty much everything you need within that very, very small valley. Or if you happen to fly in Geneva, a combination between those two, you can almost find almost everything that you need. So that's not the important part of the story. The more important part of the story is what happened on the backside of the race. So this athlete was having a, you know, rough day, kind of behind his splits, but certainly within, you know, within all the cutoffs. One of the things that he needed to gather was all of this nutrition, because he was planning on flying with it, and he gathered it all, you know, in the Chamonix Valley, and just didn't get enough of it, you know, kind of quite frankly. And so his wife, who's his primary crew, texted me kind of late into the evening, it's probably 10 or 11 p.m. on Friday, and told me two things. One, I am falling asleep because they were all jet lagged, and I don't feel safe driving from Champex-Lac to Triant. And two, this athlete has run out of his nutrition. So I said, listen, I'll drive out to Triant. I was in Chamonix at the time. It was like, you know, 11 p.m. He was going to be there at 4 a.m. or some kind of ungodly hour. And I said, just stay in Champex-Lac. I'm going to tell this athlete that you're going to stay in Champex-Lac. So you're going to sleep, and he's, you know, he's not kind of concerned about you, you know, driving through a couple of foreign countries, all sleep deprived and jet lagged and things like that. That's a psychological thing. And I will take care of the nutrition. I'll find it. I'll solve the problem. Don't worry about it. I'll just solve it. And I just happened to, during this whole thing, I just happened to be getting gelato which is it will be a material part of the story in just a second. I just happened to be getting gelato at 11 p.m. and noticing that everything is closed. However, there's 10,000 runners in the Chamonix Valley. I don't need to rely on stores to get stuff. And then magically, Billy Yang and his whole crew appeared. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm just going to ask Billy for all of his stuff. So Billy shout out to Billy Yang, put together this care package, this kind of elaborate, actually, care package of stuff for this one athlete that needed like 2 gels going into the Triant aid station. And so I took that and I drove out to Triant, a couple hours away, maybe about an hour away, like 3 or 4 in the morning or something like that, to meet him in Triant. And he took 2 things from me. 2 things, two things, neither of which were all that material at the end of the day. It's not like rocket fuel or something that would like solve some sort of epic problem. But his feedback afterwards was, oh my God, I felt so much better after I left that aid station. And it had absolutely nothing to do with anything that I put in his water bottles, like nothing. It was very, very, very minor and trivial, and he would have been fine just getting stuff from the aid station. But because somebody made the effort to, 1, give his wife some rest, which they kind of desperately needed at the time, and 2, to my first point of just being there, that part of it lifted everything, lifted him physically, emotionally, psychologically, and he ended up having a pretty good race after that. So my whole point with that is never underestimate just the fact of just being there, because I guarantee you nothing that I gave him, which was very little of this whole elaborate care package that I got from my friend Billy, nothing in there was all that material. It was just actually making the effort to go out there. That was the material part of it.
Koop, I think that intangible effect of just being there for someone, even if it's not at a race, is probably one of the bigger use cases for coaching that sometimes people aren't even aware of. And I think it's part of why someone will still be with a coach 10 years down the line, even if they kind of know where the training architecture is going. They figured out a lot of the nutrition, yada, yada. They know that before the race, they're going to have someone in their corner. And that's your time to reach out and say something authentic and meaningful. There's bonus points for that. You just being there is part of it. And then you also have that opportunity to say something that's going to make an actual difference, and then check in afterwards and actually care about how it went. And they can sense that. And if they know you care and you give them authentic feedback beforehand of how ready they are, I think it can make a huge difference.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I'm actually, so every year I've mentioned this, I kind of like ratchet up my budget and the whole infrastructure that I have to be there, whether it's buying a van or, all the things that kind of like go into that. I'm going to take like another step forward as well and just try to be there more virtually. I don't know how I'm going to orchestrate that, but that's going to be a deliberate part of it, because I kind of feel so strongly about it, along with a lot of the other things that I've been ratcheting up from year to year. So that will be we'll probably come back a year from now and I'll say the exact same thing. I can double down on it again. Nice. Okay, so that's my first thing, just being there. My second thing is more of it's a little bit more of a business component, and that's that the landscape of coaching is changing, and I think it's changing for the better. It's getting more mature, more sophisticated. There are more people involved. I never thought in a million years we'd have 85 people physically attend a coaching conference to which there's not going to be a virtual component to it. So I'm referring to the USCA conference that by the time this podcast will come out, will be a few weeks old. And it's not like we don't have all the video from it. We have all the video, all the audio. It's all captured professionally, and we're not going to release it as an aftermarket product or anything like that, because we believe in the kind of the physical touch point so much of getting all the people in the same room and things like that. I never would have thought that there was a marketplace for that 3 or 4 years ago. Like, no chance. Like, don't pass go. That's a stupid idea. There's not enough people that'll want to come to it. And I'm not saying that conferences are like the end all be all of the evaluation of professionalism within coaching, but it's a pretty freaking good litmus test, to be honest with you. The fact that people will take time out of their weekend, which is always everybody's hottest commodity, fly from all over North America. And we actually had some people from outside of North America, from my understanding as well, attend this as well, take their time, plunk down a few $100 to come, just to learn from some of the brightest minds and kind of geek out about coaching for of all things for a few days is actually kind of amazing. And I made this remark to a number of individuals who were at this conference. It was really interesting to see the adoption across this space, but it was also interesting to see who's not there. And I'm not saying that everybody has to go to every single conference or continuing ed or whatever, but it has been, in my observation, very clear that there is a group of coaches that is interested in their professional development, and there is a group of coaches that is just not. And that's not indifferent from cycling or triathlon or any of the other endurance sports, but at least seeing that separation is something that is new, because before it was just all the latter group. There was a group of people that just wasn't, with all due respect to the people that are in there. I just never saw it. I never saw it, especially adopted more kind of en masse, as we've been able to see with a lot of these opportunities that exist within USCA. And there's a lot of different flavors of this. I mean, Esker Juke and Droop has a course now that I've taken. Stacy Sims has a course that a number of our coaches have taken, and things like that. So just to see that landscape change, where people are treating it professionally, more people are doing it full time. Not that that's the only flavor, but more people are doing it full time. More people are taking the leap, and instead of bifurcating their time between 5 or 6 different side hustles, they're saying, "Hey, listen, I can do this as a full time deal." More people are building businesses around it, like really good businesses around it. That part of it, to me, is I don't know if I just learned it this year, or it's just something that's really exciting for me to actually see, because I've seen how powerful it can be in other sports. We did this in cycling, we did this in triathlon, and the kind of the communities like coalesced around professional coaches and professional coaching companies. The athletes got a lot better, and that's very clear if you just like look at the results across triathlon and cycling and running. That coaching piece was not the only, certainly, but a big catalyst of all of that. So it's really neat to see that progression finally starting to be tangible, to where people look at it as a professional opportunity that they're going to invest in, and they kind of need to, if they want to serve their athletes the best, because all of the other coaches are actually doing it. And it will be a case, mark my word, that 3 or 5 years from now, the ones that have invested in their profession, just like any other ones, are going to prosper more, and the people that they counsel, their athletes, are going to prosper more than the people that don't invest in it and kind of stay in their own silos and don't do anything. That's not to say that they can't be successful, but there definitely will be a separation there, just like any other profession. Professionals who invest in their profession end up outperforming and outpacing the professionals that don't invest in their profession across any service industry that you can think of. And that's like I said, that's something that I learned has been really cool this year, and it's just been highlighted really over the last 6 months over a couple of developments that I've seen, one of which is this conference that we all just attended.
I was completely shocked by the participation we saw, and just overjoyed at how many coaches were there wanting to be better and investing that much and being better. I wanted to see that coming at all either.
And the more the better. I mean,
yeah.
Speaking 100%. To the continuing education opportunities that we have within CTS, and kind of learning from different coaches who have strengths and backgrounds in different areas, and kind of getting able to benefit from their additional knowledge that we don't necessarily, have or aren't as strong in. I think similar can be said for the group of professional coaches that are coming to these conferences and really trying to up their game. I think it's going to up everyone's game. And, as a coach that wants to provide, the best for their athletes, however way that comes from other coaches and learning from other coaches coming to these conferences, the better. I'll take it all.
Yeah. I mean, once again, none of us are doing anything proprietary. We might like to think that, we're doing something special, or somebody's got a secret sauce or whatever. But at the end of the day, I mean, both on the technical training side as well as the kind of the business side of things, most people, not everybody, most people have a remarkably like similar structure behind that. And the more that everybody can learn about what's working, what's not working, and what best practices are, what practices kind of like fall short, I think is better for everybody. Because once again, Addison, you see this kind of on the athlete services side. We do see athletes that come into CTS because of a bad experience, right? They know that they need guidance and things like that. And we've been like victims of that on the other side. We've provided poor experience that people go out and they shop the marketplace, just to be transparent and not to act like we like know all the answers or anything like that. But I've always said that for every one of those people that says, hey, I had a bad experience over here, I'm going to reinvest, I'm going to shop the marketplace, and I'm going to go somewhere else. For every one of those people, there's 8 or 10 that just are out of the marketplace. They just say, listen, I'm gone. And that's not good for the marketplace as a whole. And I'm going to switch from the business side in just a second for people that are tired of this. That's not good for the marketplace as a whole, because that customer base will eventually deteriorate when that happens, because you've got to have 10 good experiences for one poor one just to make it net, not just to grow it, right? Just to make it net out. You've got to have that. But the real reason is that it's tragic is that it affects the athlete who's spending their money and hard-earned time, right, at the end of the day. And that's the most tragic piece of it, that when somebody has a bad experience is they have trusted somebody with a large proportion of their time. 10 hours, 12 hours, 15 hours a week. That's a lot of time. And when you're trusting somebody to do the right thing with that time, or to help guide you within that time, and they let you down for whatever reason, that's a really tragic unveiling of their actual time. And so the fact that more professionals are coming in and we're going to get that proportion better, meaning the proportion of athletes that succeed and do better and have good experiences versus bad experiences, that's good for the whole group of athletes for everything. Whenever you can improve that proposition.
Yeah, our athletes,
like you, Adam, was kind of overjoyed was the word that you used. I liked it. I was overjoyed I knew the numbers going into it, so I'd kind of gotten over it. but the enthusiasm, I think, was the thing that I was the most excited about. Just people genuinely curious and just psyched to be there was really cool. But the landscape is changing. Okay, we're going to leave it at that. That was fun. Thank you guys for being guinea pigs on this. I think you guys both brought great things to the table. Any parting shots that either of you want to opine on before we go?
Just that I'm always here to keep making mistakes and getting better and doing the best I can.
You do a pretty good job at avoiding most, I'll be honest with you.
Oh, thank you.
I made a lot more mistakes 5 years ago than you're making right now. So,
well, you haven't even seen the list yet.
Yeah, that's true.
But I appreciate it.
Trust me, I can imagine.
No, this has been fun. Hopefully, coaches can learn a little bit from our banter and start to tread the waters of the art of coaching a little bit more with kind of what we talked about. So
very well put, young Addison. I appreciate you guys' time. Thanks a lot for coming on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, folks, there you have it. There you go. Much thanks to coaches Adam and Addison. There's a lot of alliteration going on in this podcast. Coaches Adam and Addison for coming on the podcast today and enlightening us with the experiences that they have had this year. I always appreciate our coaches' collective perspective on these things, because I learn a lot about what they have learned throughout the course of a year. If you are considering coaching, go ahead. You can hit me up via direct message, or you can go direct to our coaching website, which is trainright.com. There will be a link to that in the show notes. We would love to see how we can help you get you closer to your goals. I know the fall is the time of year where a lot of athletes tend to recalibrate what they're doing. We see this across the spectrum of elite athletes and everyday athletes alike. They look at their season and look at what they can improve. And if coaching is one of those areas where you think you can improve, give us a shout. We'd love to see how we can help you in that endeavor. All right, folks, that is it for today. And as always, we will see you out on the trails.